If, you are having extremely frequent, like, screaming matches or anything more dramatic than, like, a simple disagreement, then this is not the podcast for you.
Bullshit.
You should...
This is exactly the fucking podcast.
Well, I think that maybe there's... Don't you...
Well, everyone should listen to this podcast.
Okay.
It doesn't matter. That's what I was trying to say before. This is the first argument. Okay?
No.
Everyone and their fucking dog should listen to this podcast.
Okay, yes, and...
This week's argument.
Cool. Well, welcome everyone. Welcome podcast to the first episode of this week's argument. My name is Max Jared Einzone.
And my name is Shannyn Einzone.
This is pretty exciting. You know what we, the Jews do when you do something for the first time?
What did the Jews do, Max?
Well, this is what we do as well, right? So, like, I feel like introducing ourselves is pretty important.
That's right.
Like, first off, but also... we're Jewish. We're Jewish as fuck. And, like, we like to say sheks, which is the shortening of shehechianu, which is a Jewish blessing for when you do something for the first time or when you use something for the first time, like if you have a new shirt or whatever. So since this is the first episode that we're doing of our podcast, which we've been talking about for like a bajillion years.
Like at least, probably 3 at this point.
And we've been together for 5. You're going to hear more about our story soon, don't worry. Let's say Shechianu.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Shechianu v'kiyamanu v'higianu lezman hazeh.
Which is like just bringing consciousness and presence to the amazing journey that has brought us to this moment and celebrating this moment here. So...
Yay!
Amen, bitches.
Okay, so that was like also one of my questions which we didn't talk about beforehand, which is what our language is going to be on this podcast, because we are educators and so we like straddle this interesting place of I don't think we have a problem in our personal life like swearing or using that kind of language, and then like we switch on teaching educating mode and we like switch it off. Like I really feel like I have a switch, like I'm pretty good at turning like my filter on and off, and we didn't talk about beforehand like if we were gonna swear on the podcast or like censor our language or not.
First off, I think I called you and I was like, I'm thinking about the podcast and I just want to be able to say fuck and be fully me and like no holds back,
not censored.
But also because I feel like what we're going to be talking about requires us to be like just stripped open and just like,
that's true.
Like
we want it to be like honest and raw and we don't want it to be filtered. Yeah. So I guess that pertains
Sorry,
to...
Mom. You're going to hear me curse. We're going to talk about...
I don't think we're excessive, but...
I may be leaning into it just a little bit because, like, I get to just, like, no holds barred, say what I want to fucking say, like, And because we are educators, sometimes we do, like, we put on our little hat, and actually the hat is a muffle. And I don't have to not say things that I want to say. But this is another opportunity for us to be, like, to show more of who we are.
Right.
And to celebrate that.
Okay.
So what is this podcast? Who are we?
That's what I was just about to say. So this week's argument is a concept that we've had for many years now, as we mentioned.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but why are we starting with the podcast? We should start with who we are, don't you think? Like, why is anyone listening to us?
I was It's funny because it's like even the intro we're like having a difference in opinion, but I was gonna go with the overarching and then explain who we are.
Okay,
I was getting there.
We did not talk about the flow of this podcast. We just figured, you know what, we're just gonna start. We're gonna see where it goes, where it grows, and
gotta start somewhere.
I'm sorry that I interrupted you. I trust you.
Thank you.
Lead us. Tell us what's next.
Okay. We are all in many relationships in our lives. We interact with many people every day and care about them in different ways. And people have disagreements. People have differences of opinion, as Max so kindly just demonstrated. And we wanted to have a place to explore relationships and to explore differences of opinion in a safe space, and also talking about regular things that come up and are impactful in relationships. Why do we care about that?
Why
the two of
Shannyn?
us? Who are we?
Nice.
We are Shannyn and Max, and
Also known as Schmacks.
that's
together.
right. Hashtag
Schmacks.
Schmacks.
So just like write that down.
Start tweeting right now. And we are, in fact, a real life couple. We are married.
We're married.
And before we were married, when we first began our relationship, we were actually in a long distance relationship between New York, where Max was living at the time, and Melbourne, Australia, where I was living at the time. So having such a long distance relationship, what we called a long distance relationship, really helped us to build this culture of communication within our own relationship. And I think that in general, we really like to examine our own behaviors, things we're doing. We like to talk about it. We like to talk about feelings that we've got around certain things. And if long distance taught us anything, it was just that communication is key.
I want to chime in and just add that we are creative people. And
Right.
we create songs, we create ideas, we create communities, we enjoy being creative. And so this whole idea of the podcast and us talking about our relationship and sharing that, essentially the experience of that growth journey with people, came about because when we were in a long distance relationship, we started going to the balcony and essentially looking down at our relationship and writing down different things that we used to do and we still do, and then we started to kind of develop all of this language that we were we're gonna write a long distance relationship survival guide. And then so we're both in the relationship and actors and players and impacting what's happening, but then we pause and we're all right, well, let's just talk about this and that kind of stuff. And it kind of helped us develop these tools, these practices for our relationship. And we just realized when we do that, when we talk about our relationship, when we check in with each other, it's really, really fantastic. And because of that, we thought, let's try and share that journey and share some of those things and also include other people and try and see if our experiences are like other people's experiences, if our relationship and the things that we experience in it are found in other relationships, whether that's a loving relationship or a business partner relationship or
Family relationships,
mother, daughter, child, best friends. We're all in relationship with each other, and there are these core themes that are embedded in it. Like you said, Shannyn, communication is key. And essentially this whole podcast is about exploring what happens in relationships, the inevitable arguments that come out. And sometimes it's not a big argument, it's just a disagreement or a misunderstanding. You can fill in argument. This week's fill in the blank: argument, disagreement, misunderstanding. It's not a full-on fucking rage match.
Right. I think that if, you are having extremely frequent screaming matches or anything more dramatic than a simple disagreement, then this is not the podcast for you.
Bullshit.
You should...
This is exactly the fucking podcast.
Well, I think that maybe there's...
Well, everyone should listen to this podcast.
Okay.
It doesn't matter. That's what I was trying to say before. This is the first argument. Okay.
No.
Everyone and their fucking dog should listen to this podcast.
Okay. Yes, and if you are having really, really, really dramatic arguments, maybe... in addition to listening to this podcast,
go see a therapist. True. We are definite proponents of therapy.
Exactly. That's all I'm saying.
We are individually.
Always.
We have therapeutic practices that we both do individually as well as together. We are super supportive of couples therapy. We do it whenever we feel like we need to check in with an expert. We are not therapists. That's
right.
important to note. I think that's a very important... Thank you for bringing that up, Shannyn. I do appreciate that.
Well, this is going to be entertaining. It's going to be fun. You're going to learn some stuff. You're going to reflect on your own relationships. And it is not therapy. I don't think it counts as therapy on any kind of certified official level.
But you're also welcome to reach out to us and pay us $150 an hour and
To
actually
listen.
to listen. The reason why that we were saying we would be open to that, even though we are not therapists, we are relationship advice givers. And we care about people's relationships. We care about our relationship. We care about people's relationships. And so we are actively engaged in the process of trying to make that experience better for everyone involved.
We're also human beings, and we care about other people, and it can be really fun to interact with other people who share the same interests and want to have the same conversations. That's literally why we wanted to start this podcast, because just talking about things obviously is therapeutic, and people want to share their experiences, and people want to be heard. It doesn't matter if it's by an official therapist or not. People want to be heard. We're happy to be those people, and thank you for hearing us.
And thank you for being with us on the journey, right? Like, this is episode 1. We don't know where this is going to go. We do have ideas, and one of the things we wanted to talk about in this first episode is what exactly is this fucking podcast, and how is it going to be, and what is it going to, like, you know, what can listeners expect as all these things. Yeah.
We specifically did not settle on a format yet, because I think we both thought that it was going to be pretty entertaining to decide during the podcast what we were going to do for the podcast, because we did have like differing opinions about it. So it's kind of funny to hash out that discussion in a public forum, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. So Shannyn and I live in outside of Melbourne, Australia, and we take walks on the beach as much as as often as we possibly can. And one evening, walking on the beach, we're talking about this podcast, and we are like talking about like essentially our expectations for the podcast, having not spoken to each other. And I was like, yeah, we should do this. And then you were like, no, what?
Right.
Wait, whoa. No, and I was like, yeah, we have to have it that way. And you're like, no. And I was like, this is fucking hilarious. This should be the first podcast. Is like, what is the podcast? And how is it going to be? And what else was going to... God, man, it's so interesting. You know, just going to pause for a second. Doing this is fascinating, because I'm like trying to think about the trajectory of where we're trying to go. And also when you start talking, you're just like in it, and then you're like, I can't stop talking because this is a fucking podcast, and if it's silent, it's weird, and oh my God. Anyway, so what is this week's argument podcast?
Well, I sat at a list in my phone like months ago, maybe even years at this point, because I knew we were talking about the idea of this podcast. And so every time we had a disagreement or some kind of, pretty much every time we had a disagreement, I wrote down what it was about. So, because I was like, well, if we're having an argument, the least I could do is get some fucking content for our podcast.
No shit. How have you been doing this for years?
So the concept of this week's argument is exploring one argument or idea or point of disagreement every episode, and sort of arguing our different points of view.
And break down the experience, right? So that we can kind of take away, you know, ideas or practices that we can then, you know, put into practice next time. By the way, I think it's important that people know that, like, we were in a long distance for a relationship for 2.5 years. I moved from New York to Australia, to Melbourne. We immediately moved in together.
Right.
And that began I think it was like December 6th, 2016. We have been cohabitating for over 3 years now. We got married a year and a half ago on August the 18th, 2018. Mm-hmm. Think about if you've ever lived with a roommate, let alone like a brother or a sister. Like, shit comes up.
Right.
And
when
like,
you live with someone, you share a space.
Exactly. So I think that's, you know, at the core is like when you're in a relationship with someone, when you're interacting with someone, stuff comes up. And we want to talk about that. We want to talk about it through the lens of our journey, through the experiences, through the questions, through the arguments, through the disagreements that we've had. And ideally, at the end of this, we are identifying some sort of takeaway, some sort of thing at the end
Right.
of every single, conversation, podcast, session, episode, whatever, which, by the way, I kind of have my idea about how this podcast should go. And I think it should be like multiple episodes per argument as opposed to just one. But ideally, we're
Disagree.
Disagree. You say you disagree right now.
Disagree. Just
Okay.
putting it out there.
Well, we have agreed, before we get to the disagreement, I think it's important to share with our millions of listeners. Our millions of listeners. Which is probably just like our mom and like maybe Dylan. One thing that we do agree on, we're going to have like a guest judge.
Yeah.
Tell our millions of listeners, Shannyn, my love,
Yes, darling.
what is this guest judge going to do?
So there should be a guest judge who is going to come in and listen to both sides of our argument and kind of make a judgment call on whose side they take. I don't want to necessarily say the winner, but like who they kind of side with in that argument and who they agree with in each situation. And our goal is to really have guest judges from all walks of life, from all different relationship
And
stages, types of relationships, all different professions, people who maybe professionally do deal with relationships, and then also people who completely do not deal with relationships in their job, people who are single, people who have been married for a very long time, really like completely a random selection, if you will, because we want to try and see how different people react differently to our arguments based on their own life experience as well and their own relationships.
Yeah, and like different, like I'm also thinking about like different ages, like
Yes,
wisdom.
exactly.
I know that like for me, like as I've grown, I've kind of, my world perspective has changed, and like my understanding of love and loving relationships has changed as I experience them. And so I'm like wondering, like what like we should have our fucking nanas on.
I was literally
definitely
just
have,
imagining my nana on a podcast, which would be quite gold for many reasons.
I like it.
But it would be kind of amazing to have our nanas. But also, I would be open to the idea of having I think I would be interested personally in understanding what two people from different age groups, for example, thought on the same subject, because we're going to be bringing in different guest judges for every episode. It's not like we have the same guest judges for a whole, for 10 podcasts or something.
Yeah.
So maybe we could bring in a couple different guest judges together to see what the difference in opinion is on the same issue.
I wonder if that's something that we could do as a season wrap up. Because themes will come out,
Like
right?
a panel.
Like a panel.
That would be fun.
Yeah, like an end of season panel of different judges who come from different walks of life, different perspectives, like someone who's divorced and someone who's, 18 and someone who's,
65.
65, someone, different same-sex relationships, like whatever it is, like all different types. Maybe not 15 different people, but like 4.
Yeah, for sure.
To be able to have. That could be fun. All right, listen. I think we should get into it. I want to get to the core aspect of let's choose a side, share our perspectives about what this podcast should be and why. Because you shaking your head, you're like, no, we should not have 2-part episodes.
We shouldn't.
Okay, so
Okay,
let me
you
explain. You explain your idea, then I'll
Yes.
explain my idea. Go for it.
Okay. You sit up really straight. You're like, all right, well, we're doing
Bring it
this.
the fuck
So,
on,
okay.
Shannon. I love you, by the way, so much.
I love
Thank
you
so
too.
much for doing this with me. I really so grateful. This is so much fun.
Great. I'm right.
Now sit.
So, people have very short attention spans these days. And if they're still listening 27 minutes in, I'm incredibly impressed. I don't like podcasts that are longer than 30 minutes an episode, personally. And I know you listen to them on 1.5 speed or whatever to make them shorter. But I still am definitely put off by long podcasts. And I also like things to be concise. I love things to be kind of nicely wrapped up, loose ends tied off, really put together by the end of the episode. if you listen to the whole thing and the whole argument and the guest judge and everything, only to not find out what their ruling is by the end of the episode, I would be so pissed. I think that's like super duper annoying. And that is why we should have one episode per argument. You find out the ending of the argument, you find out the judge's ruling and who they want to side with. And because I'm imagining as well, we'll probably put like in the name of the part, like the episode, what that argument is about. You would expect to know the ending of the argument. If I want to listen to this specific episode that is like about doing the dishes, for example, and I click at doing the dishes, I want the solution to that argument at the end of that episode. I don't want to have to click on the episode called like in-laws visiting to find out the solution to doing the dishes. That doesn't make any sense.
Oh, okay. So explain what you think my perspective is, because I think that I just heard you say something that makes me think that you actually don't really get my idea.
I understand your idea, because your idea is...
Even though our podcast listeners have not listened to it and I have not yet shared it. But go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I think that your idea is we talk about... We hash out the argument. We have the guest judge offer their opinion, talk about it, and then it's like, dun, 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 tune in next time to find out who won the argument. And then the start of the following episode is like, here's a wrap-up of what you missed, here's the ruling, actually rules on the argument, and then we start going into a completely, like, another argument. Sounds very long. So I'm already like, I wouldn't listen.
Okay.
Too long.
I hear what you're saying. I hear your expectations. May I share my opinion?
One more little
Go ahead,
provision.
I'm listening.
Which is...
You have the talking stick.
I do. I still have the talking stick.
It's
which
invisible for those who are listening.
How would they know if they were just listening whether it was invisible or not?
But still...
They could have been real for all they know.
We get to line all these fucking people.
Anyway.
Just so you know, the talking stick is an 18-inch black dildo. that wiggles back and forth every time you talk.
I'm being very quiet. I'm holding it very still. Anyway, obviously, as we continue to grow and share, and hopefully lots of people want to hash out their arguments with us, like, I want to engage with our audience, as you just said, and probably have like people on social media suggesting different arguments that they had, or, you know, just giving, like, being able to say who they want to side with. Then, in the fashion of like our most amazing idol of relationship podcasts, Mr. Dan Savage, we could have at some point, maybe at the beginning, maybe at the end, like people calling in, giving their feedback of like, you know, I just listened to the washing dishes episode and I have to say I actually really sided with Max. I think that the judge got it wrong, blah, blah, blah. Have like 2 or 3 minutes of that as we continue to grow, because I want it for people to be engaged. But in the beginning, I think short and sweet is the way to go.
Thank you. Can
I rest my case.
Thank you. I hear your perspective, Shannyn. I love you for that. And I would like you to know that I share your opinion. And I want it to be short and sweet as well.
Mm-hmm.
I need to be more concise when I speak. So I will work on that with you, with our listeners, on this journey in this week's Argument podcast. And I think that if we had like a short and sweet 20-minute intro where we introduce like, what's up, hey everyone, introduce the argument, share the perspective, introduce the judge,
mm-hmm.
share their story, because everyone needs to have context of who the fuck is this judge? Why is this person important, right? Then we end it, okay? And we end it, and then that's part 1. Part 2 is the judge. We then say, you know, what's up everyone? Here's where we're at. Short recap for those who haven't listened to part 1. Judge offers perspective. Then we do listener responses, and what it does is it gives people an opportunity to not be influenced by the judge and to share their, like, they're the judges, are the right, to allow people to say, like, I think this, I think that, and see. It'll be interesting to see whether or not they agree with the judge, and then that's a 15 or 20 minute episode, and bam, part 2 done. Introduce next week, we're going to do this. Introduce the next one, bam, we're done.
So, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Why would people listen to part 1?
Because they want to hear the context for the story.
But there's a recap.
Yeah, it's a short recap, not going into details, and they enjoy the journey of us talking about our shit.
What about when we listen to Dan Savage and then
Can we just pause and just say, like, Dan Savage, you're amazing.
best.
Thank you. And if you don't know who we're talking about, if you don't know who Dan Savage is, listen and go check out the Savage Love cast. And that kind of started, I think, maybe ruminating the idea, helping us ruminate around the idea of having a podcast. So thanks, Dan Savage. And also Esther Perel. Mm-hmm. Dope. Oh my God. Love these people. Their perspective on relationships has genuinely blown my mind. I also think yours, and has 100% influenced the way that we think about our relationship and relationships in general. It's like really opened the doors to just being like non-judgmental and thinking about like everyone's relationship is different, and that's okay, and which makes it interesting
Definitely.
to think about the things that we experience and how we want to feel. Anyway, so.
And some of the language and the ideas that they use, like we now use to talk about our relationship, and we also share with others so they can talk about their relationship within that context. So that's really cool, and hopefully one day you'll know who we are and that we exist. Ultimate goals. So when we listen to Dan Savage, or when we listen to the Savage Lovecast, someone will call in, because Dan has been doing this for a long time. So someone calls in and says, hi, my name's blah, blah, blah. I'm from blah, blah, blah. And they outline their whole situation, question, whatever it is. And while they're talking, before Dan answers, Max and I, when we're sitting in the car, usually we're listening to these in the car, we predict what we think Dan's answer is going to be to the question, how he's going to respond. Is he going to say, you're an idiot, dump them? Or is he going to say, wow, I think that you should, whatever. We make a prediction just between each other, and that takes all of the 3 seconds, you know?
Yeah.
Between...
I'm like, he's going to tear this fucking person a new asshole and whatever. Yeah.
Right. And then sometimes we're like completely wrong, and sometimes we're completely right. And that's a fun thing to do in the moment.
Right.
So you don't need a whole other episode.
Okay, so what if we did this? I'm hearing you. I definitely hear you.
I want people this interaction, of course, but also I want them to just like get listening to the show first. And then actually what we should do is put it out there into the world in the most accessible form possible, so people can engage with us and listen to it and then let us know what they want.
I also agree with that 100%. I feel very open to having our listeners inform and direct some of our formatting and how we do this podcast. No question. I'm totally down with that. So if you have an idea, let us know.
At Shannyn and Max.
How do you spell Shannyn?
Shannyn is spelled SHANNYN ANDMAX.
Yeah,
Shannyn and Max.
So I definitely am super open to that. Like that sounds cool. So I think we both agree that we should have it be fairly short, like under 40 minutes. Here's my thought process, okay?
Yeah.
Introduce the idea, check in, have a little rant. What's up with you? How are you doing? Yeah, I'm grateful for this. Also, here's where you pissed me off.
Right.
Introduce the argument, go through it, share perspectives, pause for like sponsorship break, because clearly we're going to be sponsored.
Absolutely.
Right? And then in that moment we say, please leave us, text us or
exactly.
send us whatever. See, but this is why, because people listen to, this is why, okay, I'm going back. I totally take it back. I take it back. You're fucking wrong. And
We were
why.
so close.
Here's why. I'm sorry. I love you.
You were right there.
I love you. And this is why you're wrong. Okay, so here's why. Because I back listen to podcasts.
Yeah.
People don't listen live, right? So like,
Right.
we should give them time, a week at least, you know?
No.
Yes.
No way.
Because
Because
if
sometimes
I'm
you
listening-
binge out podcasts and you're not going to have people tweeting about something. And if you back listen, that means you're slow on the game, my friend. So you just
Hold
got to
on.
smash it out.
I just want everyone to know that if you're listening to this podcast and this is, 2023, good on you. Fucking good on you, okay? I'm not gonna
got
hate.
here
I'm not
eventually.
gonna hate like my lovely, beautiful, amazing, compassionate wife. I really hope we're still together in 2023 to be able to say I plan on that. I'm just letting you know.
When you say it like that.
Well, let's actually give our listeners something that we do every single day to kind of cultivate love, because
Yes.
I think this is one of my favorite things that we do. And clearly, we're going to need to do part 2 of this episode to figure out how the podcast
You're
is
such
actually
a
going to be.
smartass. I nearly had him as well. This is such bullshit. I nearly had you. I'm so mad about this. I'm so mad.
Just to add value to our listeners and to be able to like really give them a takeaway, like one thing that we just had this moment. Let me just pause this one. Okay. So we just had this moment where I made a comment. I said, I really hope that we're still married in 2023. And, from one perspective, that comment is like, well, why the fuck wouldn't we be? What's wrong with you?
Why would you articulate
Why would you
that?
say that? That kind of thing. Like add like the possibility of us not being together, right?
Right.
Because that can be like construed as like, oh, are you doubting this kind of thing? Like,
Right.
But I want to share, and I think that we practice this, that like, just because we are in a relationship now does not mean that we will be in a relationship in the future.
And actually, I think that
But
if you...
I just want to finish because it's important, because I care about you and I care about our listeners, because I want you to know this. Like, that doesn't mean that there's the intention to be together isn't there.
Right.
It means that I want to communicate and be the best. I want to communicate my love and be the best partner that I can possibly be today, tomorrow, and I'm going to say it every single day, so that every single day between now and 2023, we are actively working to cultivate the love that we want to feel in the relationship. There's no expectation that it's going to be there, because the truth is that relationships are up and down, right? We know that in our relationship.
Right.
So when you say at the end of the day, thank you for loving me today, I feel like, holy shit, I'm in a loving relationship.
Right.
Because my partner recognized that I put in action into our love, into cultivating a palpable sense of love between us.
There's effort put in.
There's effort put in. Exactly.
Well, I was talking to someone about this recently, and the fact of the matter is that even though I don't like you making comments like that, because I just don't like it when people say stuff like that. Like, there is no guarantee. There is no guarantee in any relationship, really. And, we were talking about, like, a kind of new dating situation, and they were saying, like, oh, I just get worried that he's going to wake up and, not want to hang out with me anymore and not want to spend time. And I said, well, no one can really, like, promise you that. I said, Max could wake up tomorrow and decide, like, that he wants to leave me. Like, I have nothing that I do in myself, in my actions, can actually make you promise me that you will never, ever, ever feel differently about this relationship. There's no way you can guarantee that. So it actually is just about being in the present moment and working as much as you can on the relationship now, in this day, in this week, in any way that you can. That's the only thing you can guarantee. I can say today, yeah, I feel awesome and I feel loved, and that's great. So being in the present moment and not worrying too much about promising the future when it's nothing you can guarantee is important.
Yeah. And I want to live and act as if I love you, because I do love you, every single day. And then that love will occur, right? We'll feel that love because we'll work towards it. And if we don't feel that love, we need to address that. That's an important aspect of our relationship and of relationships in general, because we recognize that it's not a given.
Right.
Nothing in a relationship is a given. You have to work. We work. Everyone has to work every single day to practice feeling loved, practice
Showing love, giving love.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And you should be grateful. You should be grateful for the love that you have right now today.
Exactly. I 100% agree. And you know what I'm thinking about? Like someone who maybe is listening who doesn't actually like feel loved or feel like they're in a loving relationship. I actually would like you to think about for a second, instead of trying to find that love from an outward source, thinking about how you love yourself and just pausing for a second and practicing loving yourself.
Getting to know yourself on a really deep level is super important, especially because then we know how we feel love. It's worth just knowing your own love languages, because that is one of the biggest gifts that you can give yourself in relationship. And I'm sure we'll talk about love languages throughout many episodes of this podcast, because once I realized what my love languages were, that's another thing that you can articulate clearly to your partner, and that makes you feel loved.
We'll go into depth in future episodes because I think it's really valuable for the people listening, you know, anyone in a relationship, to understand both how you feel loved and also how another feels loved, and then analyzing how you communicate love.
Exactly.
That's kind of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So just looping back to what we were saying about like spending time with yourself, like if you don't feel like you're in a loving relationship, or even if you are in a loving relationship, taking time to think about how you feel loved and when you feel loved and what your love languages are is going to help when you are in an opportunity to communicate that to another person or persons.
Yeah, for sure.
Or people. So, okay.
So did we even make a decision on how we're doing this podcast?
Which is exactly why I think we should have 2-part episodes. But I will just say, I'm happy to go on the journey of doing this in one thing. Here's what I think we should do. Maybe do a quick summary. I also think we should do a quick commercial break for our sponsors, because we definitely have someone who this episode is brought to you in part by. And then we should also make sure that we allow space for a little bit of listener mail, a little bit of feedback, you know, from someone who's listened to this podcast, who will have listened to this podcast. So let's begin. All right, wrap up. What have we explored? What is going to be this podcast? What have our listeners listened to in like 1 sentence or 2 sentences? Because I am horrible at being succinct.
Okay, so I'm gonna do it. Shannyn, Max, this week's argument, we are that's it. We are going to be exploring different arguments that come up in a variety of relationships. We're going to have guest judges who are going to come in and share their thoughts on our arguments and also tell us who they side with in each particular argument. We are going to hopefully have feedback from our community and suggestions on what arguments you have in your relationships and also what you think of ours.
Fantastic.
Open, honest, raw, live, panel,
Love it. Yes.
Thank you. Oh, I was going to do like the thank you for listening to this week's argument podcast. For more information, follow at Shannyn and Max on Instagram.
How do you spell that?
ShannynandMax.
On Instagram.
Yeah. Maybe on Twitter, we'll see.
So this week's episode
Okay.
is brought to you in part by our wonderful friend, Kashira Halev Fife. Kashira and Tim Fife are the most amazing people. We are so inspired by their relationship, and they are such incredible change makers all over the world, and they're such big parts of our relationship. Kashira is a Kohenet. She is a Hebrew priestess, and she helped marry us.
Yes, she did.
And she is like a ritual expert, and so we just wanted to shout out and thank Kashira Halev Fife and Tim Fife for all the love that they have given us, because our relationship would not exist if it wasn't for those people, let alone our parents and all the other people who introduced us and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, we'll get to you. Okay, cool. We love you. The list is way too long. That's another 52 minutes of talking about how many people we're grateful for being a part of our journey. But Kashira Halev Fife, Tim Fife, we love you guys. Thank you so much for being a part of our journey and for making this podcast exist because of your presence in our lives, and for making our wedding so so special.
And just for being amazing, wonderful, supportive friends to us.
You should check them out. Check them out. They're changing the world everywhere, and
we are honored to know them.
Amen.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for listener mail and some listener responses.
Yes.
From our dear friend Dylan Butfin. I'm gonna get Dylan to listen to this
and give you
and then
feedback.
And then give us, because we have to have our first caller, our first
or we
response.
just put this up and see what happens.
Well, I thought it'd be funny. I thought Dylan would do a good job he's a good writer. In next week's episode, Max.
Why we've decided to use a completely different format for our podcast. Oh, the other thing that we talked about that we haven't talked about today so far is that we actually thought maybe we would leave the argument of the podcast as a surprise for each other. So we will alternate in bringing different topics to the table, and Max will not know.
I will not know.
Until we hit record, until we're already recording live, he will not know what the argument is. And so I'm kind of gonna you're going to get the real raw reaction. It's not going to be a planned, staged reaction. It's going to be real from our lives, because we like to share that apparently. And then the next episode after that, Max will be able to have an opportunity to bring back something to me that I will be completely unaware of what we're talking about.
And just so everyone knows, this is not about calling someone out in a public forum or anything.
We're not trying to ambush each other and embarrass each other. We're genuinely interested in having these discussions because I think that they benefit other people in other relationships. And we have people ask about, the different strategies we use in our relationship to get through different discussions, different arguments. And again, because we are such advocates for clear, honest communication, I think that it's fun for us to model that and say, actually, we can talk about anything, and we shouldn't be having these conversations in the shadows, behind closed doors, because even though society has made maybe some of these conversations taboo, we should just be able to have them. Everyone experiences relationships. Everyone interacts with other people, and you need to be able to communicate clearly to the people around you, and we want to model that.
And hopefully our listeners, y'all will be able to empathize, and will be able to to connect to the experiences that we're sharing aloud. So, last but not least, I think it's really important that we share with our listeners, all 2 million of you,
and counting,
the kind of relationship practice that we call the pulse check. And what that is just checking in on, how you're feeling in the relationship. If there's anything that you feel like, I would really like to talk to you about this, or, I'm still kind of frustrated about this, or I actually feel really distant from you, or whatever it is, it's an opportunity to just create an open space for dialogue in a really low barrier way.
But it's also a little bit, it can be going to the balcony in that pulse check, and sort of, it's not about necessarily just what happened that day or the last few days. It's really an overall sense of how you're feeling in the relationship. How is that blood moving through? How are you feeling overall? Are you feeling connected? Are you feeling like you haven't had a chance to be with each other as much? Is there needs that you have that aren't being met? Things like that. It's not so much about well, you left your toothbrush in the wrong place last night, and that was, I feel like that's not the point of the pulse check. But maybe the point of the pulse check is, that you left your toothbrush out last night, and I feel like this is a recurring pattern in our relationship of me picking up after you, and that I just want you to hear me, that I need you to XYZ.
And the more often that a pulse check becomes normal in the relationship, the easier having conversations about your relationship and how you're feeling and what needs to change, and just developing. It's a tool and a practice to develop the culture of open communication around stuff. And
I think a really good practice from the pulse check is to listen to everything that your partner is saying. Let them have that space and that invisible talking stick, and don't interrupt them. And even if what they're saying you disagree with, or you have a rebuttal or whatever, practice saying, I hear you. Look at them and say, I hear you, and leave it. because the point is actually hearing each other, not necessarily hashing it out in that moment. The pulse check is about taking the pulse and just hearing each other.
All right. Well, with that, this has been episode 1 of
this week's argument.
And my name is Max Jared Einstein. And you are?
Shannyn Einstein.
Yeah, she got married to me.
I did. We have the same last name
It's
now.
so cool.
It's so funny.
And I think, maybe we'll turn this off and we'll have our own little pulse check.
Sounds good.
Look forward to being with you guys again soon.